Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. As you can see, I'm facing a Dhalsim.
Round 2. Fight.
One of the problems with this matchup for me is the sheer amount of difficulty in execution to stop Dhalsim from doing specific things. But it's not unbearable, it's just annoying sometimes in ways that are hard to explain to most players, honestly. But it is one of the larger execution tests in the game for me personally. Fortunately, Dhalsim doesn't do a terribly high amount of damage when I mess it up. It's just that it takes so long and he does this damage so consistently that it's difficult to get anywhere. I don't expect this to necessarily be much easier for DWuulfe playing Necalli because Necalli actually has less options for ways through Dhalsim stuff. Chun-Li can at least attempt to outmaneuver to mess with Dhalsim's timings and with punish in closer positions and so on, knowing that she at least can burn meter to reach where she needs to go. And Dhalsim's punishes for EX Spinning Bird Kick, while definitely still powerful, aren't like usually full damage combos that he will then get massive advantage from. Necalli has all of those as general weaknesses in this matchup, and generally can't push forward too much because there's just no way to deal with it. One of the better options you can usually have is to continue to use your V skill as much as necessary. Not necessarily as much as possible, but you can get around a bunch of Dhalsim stuff by using your V skill at the right times. As you can see there are certain places where Dhalsim must extend his hit and hurt box into the crawling beast in order to get anything. In fact, the fact that you can use this as a shield against many of the things this character wants to do forces Dhalsim to explicitly try to prevent you from actually ever doing the move. But it takes forever to beat him this way, meaning that you have to come up with more things after you've put some defensive position down. So it can't be the basis of your I'm going to win from here strategy. It is, however, useful for something to do when you've decided I can't get any closer, therefore I need to retreat before I make any further attacks. Once you've retreated, Dhalsim players will not usually be on guard to instantly catch you, resulting in capacity for use of the crawling beast, and it's not as much of a problem as trying to find the right spacing to use the other move, the seismo, because the opponent can just stay in the air in that case and still get to hit you, whereas here they at least have to worry about trading with the hitbox of the move as you advance.
Dhalsim wins.
Similarly, Dhalsim doesn't have a lot of good reasons to use drill against Necalli. The more you use the crawling beast correctly, the larger your V meter grows, and the more likely you are to get to the point where you can actually use a real shield and give the character true issues. The rest is a bunch of accuracy and understanding Dhalsim's movement. Those things you can train on our Dhalsim bot without as much stress. The other methodology, once you've gotten this close, for Necalli in particular, is to just use your V reversal fairly early into Dhalsim's strings, as he's not really a character who can easily, given his movement speed, go for the throw right after. He's not exactly a heavy tick throw character. But you gotta be looking out for every single time you get the benefit from that, and every possible time you get this sort of benefit. Really push on your opponent, because Necalli's damage is enough that Dhalsim has to react relatively perfectly. So from the game plan perspective, flinching your opponent, making them worry about things, and then putting them into crawling beast positions can minimize the damage you take while moving around. But you do have to definitely consider, can I land these V-reversals at the timing I want them? That, for example, was a good choice, instead of going for the crawling beast there, to immediately go for this guidance, more so because it is possible to get under certain attacks Dhalsim wants to do there. I think that was going to be baited even if it had come out on the first try. It's not necessarily obvious, but the crawling beast can be used fairly safely in that relatively long position, even though Dhalsim can teleport. This has to do with something about the timing it takes before he can launch an attack on a grounded teleport, and the instant air teleport being a list just short of being able to react to this, I believe. Maybe there are certain players that can, and I'd definitely love to see a matchup of that type, but it's certainly worth stressing your opponent by doing it because of stuff like that. Our Necallians, unfortunately, not necessarily familiar with this enough to really make use of it in the strong way that you'd be expecting, so it's kind of hard. But you see here, placing out this level of shield and basically having that option infinitely does offer some benefits. Unfortunately, they don't really tend to be benefits that you get from trying to advance, so if you don't have the life lead, which you generally don't if you are in that specific situation relative to V-Trigger, you may still have to hang out and just shield yourself repeatedly. It is also not a good reason to stop using the Crawling Beast. You don't necessarily switch from using Crawling Beast to using that move, but you can definitely get something out of it by going the other way and specifically trying to set up Crawling Beast even more, knowing that your opponent's options will be reduced the moment they hesitate. Other than that, just be ready to jab when they try to teleport. The Dhalsim player, in turn, can use some of his less conventional methods, or purposely take the Crawling Beast hit, depending on what they really want to happen. Necalli is not terribly good at dealing with, for example, medium yoga fire, and certain spacings make the Crawling Beast less effective because Dhalsim isn't really trying to hit the opponent so much as he is trying to move into a position where the opponent will make a mistake. The spacing, though, A Dhalsim player has the exact spacing at which everything is more or less reactable. You could even probably end up wasting your EX Hadoken on this, but Ryu does have the option there, not used, but has it, of activating V-Trigger 1, and that would have changed it just enough, probably. Not necessarily because of the charged projectiles, but simply because they move even faster. Because Dhalsim must therefore stand a little further away, be more on guard, and press less buttons, you might be able to get more dashes. So if anything, I'd say the hardest part of this matchup is making sure to properly activate V-Trigger so as to not deal with this. Unfortunately, Dhalsim isn't really a character where you can build up V-meter very fast unless you are really, really in your opponent's head and understand the parry timings. On the other hand, as I've often said, when you have a character who is probably going to hit you anyway, getting counter hit from trying a parry and failing isn't that much more damage. It's not as if you are trying a parry and getting crush countered. You're trying a parry and your parry is slightly too early, slightly too late, not technically happening at the basically at all. Just parry out because you're going to get hit anyway, so you don't have to care. Technically, you don't really want to spend too much time parrying Yoga Fire and Yoga Flame. You can just do raw stuff in neutral and hope that, yeah, this is parry time. If the situation doesn't seem to suit you, just parry it. He does have long enough startup on his moves that just mashing more stuff will usually lead to you actually landing the parry. Can you do anything after it? You don't necessarily care so much, because as demonstrated here, what we really would like to see from our current Ryu is activate that V-Trigger, get some advantage in terms of the speed of your projectiles, and possibly some of the properties of them, and see what you can get from there. Because they definitely seem to have an idea of how they want to zone here. It's just always a hard matchup. Literally every game. By design almost. So, if you are given the tool intended to get you through that, it's best to try to use that as soon as possible. I definitely would have activated after that. Raw activation is something that most people don't like to do for some reason. Or maybe I just hear that a lot and don't actually have any basis for it otherwise. But it definitely comes up, especially at higher levels, that you'll hear commentators talk about people trying to fish for V-Trigger activation. You don't just want to throw out those sorts of things in neutral most of the time if your opponent is ready for them and waiting for them. But if you're playing a zoning game, or there's some benefit you can get from just them thinking that the matchup is about to change, you can even be misleading about it and have the matchup not change. This is a matchup I dare not fight under nearly any circumstance. Dhalsim is too slippery for most of what Kolin wants to do. Her ranges aren't so great. He just dodges out of the way of a lot of advancing moves altogether, and you can definitely parry him quite hard sometimes, but the amount of times this is going to happen compared to the amount of times you need it to happen, seems a little low for my liking. In short, if I play this matchup, I'd spend way too much time on defense. Even with options like that. That, however, is something I have been considering. That just having that on demand in her V-Trigger 2 might be enough to get something done. The problem is simply that Dhalsim is more or less too reactive. He can do too many things, and you'll always spend your time, I won't call it guessing, because you can move to positions where the problem is solved, but staying there relative to Dhalsim is expensive, both in health and meter. And we see our Dhalsim playing this matchup basically perfectly. Whenever the position does not suit them, they stand there until something happens, and as soon as it does suit them again, just go in really hard and hope that you don't get parried out. The decision-making aspects of this alone hurt my head.
Dhalsim win.
But there are some days when that's actually what I want to do, so I don't think I'm going to end up being helpless in this matchup in the future. It will just take a lot of training.
Round 1. Fight.
There are very few characters for whom Dhalsim does not take a lot of training though, as he's simply that style of character. I find I have better luck training against the Dhalsim concept in other games, honestly. Not necessarily because my character has better options, because honestly, if I really want, most of my characters have options on the level of Melty Blood or similar anyway. And there are other characters who have more ability to power through things with armored moves, etc. But again, you'll notice a lot of what Ashurain is doing is just not hitting. And that's probably the part of this that's making the most difference.
Round 2. Fight.
I found one good option for trying to actually get hits from both sides is their medium kick. Kolin's stand medium kick and crouch medium kick obviously can deal with a lot of things. And Dhalsim's medium kick has a useful enough pushback property, and also isn't the standard thing he's normally doing, resulting in more chances to avoid being parried, even though it is a mid, because he spends a lot of time in these matchups going into the air to strike down quickly, or going for lows when just within range of them. Other than that, he can just throw and do other flying movements, so the amount of time that you have to actually do a medium without a setup is less. This is an opponent that Arlara has some experience with and probably trains more against than others, but it's not necessarily going to turn out useful because the style of this Dhalsim is a bit slower and their defensive style is different. they'll hang in the air for quite a long time and so on, meaning that the way you actually move toward them is, let's call it, compromised, and it may take some time for Omni to adapt to that. Lara doesn't have a lot of good ways to advance on Dhalsim, unless Dhalsim is explicitly doing things. Just floating there in the air doesn't tend to lead to much. But since her dash won't necessarily get her there in time, you have to consider one of two options. Either I'm going to take the hit just to get closer to you, and hope the fact that you're in the air gives me a chance once I'm in the space I want to be in, or you go a little bit further and just jump. As soon as Dhalsim is in the air, go to. Not necessarily because you're trying to hit him out of it, if anything the exact opposite. Because all you want is to be in a more oppressive position relative to the character. So it's very similar to the Chun-Li thing. You jump backward first, or walk backward first, so that your jump will not immediately take you into Dhalsim's attack ranges. Once that's happened, you can basically get Dhalsim players to do more things, and as a result of that, you might be a little safer. It's also cost less meter to just like jump, take jump hits, and build up other things that way. But you'll notice, for example, that Dhalsim will basically counterattack almost perfectly if you jump from too close. Yeah, literally every time. The useful thing from her side is that technically, once you've gotten to the point where jumping on Dhalsim seems like a good idea, you already have other options. They might get you hit, but those are the options that force Dhalsim to commit the hardest.
Round one. Fight.
One good easy way to remember is that this round start space you just saw, this is not the good space. This is the space you jump, because it is in fact possible to slide away from Dhalsim actually hitting you. He might deal some damage relatively heavily if he's really waiting for you to jump, but if he's really waiting for you to jump, then dashing often works, so you're just as well off, more or less. This position right here, for example, it doesn't look like the position you should jump from, but especially if your opponent can't tell what the intention of your jump is, you will get away with a lot more than you'd expect to. This is just part of the game, more or less, and when you find yourself out of position like this, that jump was incorrect because Omni should have gone back further first, and then jumped, if the jump was important. You'll notice that now, our Dhalsim player is more inclined to move forward and less inclined to spend time in the air. This is partially because there is actually no way to guarantee you'll get the hit there from the Dhalsim side. You can definitely do moves that may hit your opponent if you did the read correctly, but you cannot guarantee that you will land the hit. Because if your opponent is even slightly too far out and you are even one frame too slow, even your back heavy punch and crouching light punch, I think his light punch might be medium, they just don't hit. The opponent slides under them in the air and nothing happens. This allows you to slow down the match if you really want to, but you don't always want to slow down the match, because again, in this position, what you want is not always to jump, but simply to make your opponent spend their time thinking about the fact that you might. If they don't believe you, which is what we're seeing here, then definitely jump. A large part of this isn't necessarily to beat Dhalsim in the interaction in which you jump either. Even though he can teleport out at any time, pushing Dhalsim players to the corner puts them in a weird situation. They must choose between getting out of the corner and properly defending themselves and doing damage. That happens mostly because if you try to get close to Dhalsim in the corner, you know what will happen. He will teleport out and you're out of luck. But if you don't get that close, if you spend your time further out from corner Dhalsim, the opponent has to make a decision. Am I actually going to sit in this corner and try to defend myself, or am I going to try to teleport out and possibly risk being put into the position where my opponent was expecting my escape? So there, for example, not only was Omni too far out to actually catch them with much, although it might have been going for a specific move, the decision was much less important to BHPirkle, I believe is the name.
This is the path to achieve enlightenment.
So we're back to my side. Because Chun-Li's jump is relatively floaty, she's one of the characters that can't just jump at the same space as I was talking about before. I usually use the longer method of doing it as a wall jump first. This also helps you to position yourself relative to Yoga Fires and do other things in that space. The only way out of that one was EX Bird, and I wasn't sure I had enough charge time for it. Also, I'm not entirely sure I wouldn't have gotten hit by the Yoga Fire anyway. I thought that pressure worked, but I guess it doesn't. Again, we're stuck in that unfortunate place. I can't tell which parts of these are execution and not. And now finally I end up at basically that position. But it doesn't matter that much. I think I should have done another neutral jump there. Of course, the absolute optimal way to deal with the Dhalsim matchup is to get the life lead and sit on it, because Dhalsim's offense against Chun-Li is spotty. I definitely can't say it's terrible. Like, you will get in and you will do stuff, especially against someone only at my level. But it's hard enough to do in serious situations that I wouldn't necessarily count on it as a standard option. You'll notice that, for example, most of what is happening here is setup related, or me dropping something. There's less situations in which Dhalsim is able to force Chun-Li to go, I'm stuck now, I can't respond to this. A lot of the time, it's trying to respond that causes the failure. But if you never respond, you just won't do any damage, so it doesn't matter. And while this is frustrating in certain ways, it isn't really all that important to deal with it at all. I'm just stubborn about whether or not I want to be able to do enough, like, stubborn things against this character. Oh, I dropped it, I think. I'm not even sure. That might just not have worked at all. And I dropped that too. But I'm probably never going to give up on trying to get in that sort of way, because in the end, I'm eventually going to need it. I was going to train today on hiding intentions in pressure situations and so on, but one doesn't really do that against Dhalsim. So, unfortunately, my stream title is off. It doesn't make any sense relative to the goal here. Necalli is also in the max range heavy punch club because of the way his crouching heavy punch works. As I think I demonstrated at least once in the previous match, there is a certain spacing within Dhalsim, like long-range poke strings, where certain quick moves that don't extend your hurt box until after are able to be used to strike at the incoming limbs without you necessarily risking taking too much damage. And the best part about this is that trying to do anything else, such as get off the ground, you're going to get hit the same way, so once again, you might as well hit the button. If you were going to be controlled, and that was a situation in which you were definitely going to lose anyway because your opponent is so much better than you, learning spacings against someone of that level is probably the best you can get out of it. Because the bot cannot give you that type of knowledge at that level, despite our efforts. You can just fight it for really, really long to get this knowledge, which I have to some extent done. But it's not really the sort of thing you spend too much time on because it takes so much out of you to watch all of the interactions. In fact, you can usually tell where that spacing is in a different way. There's no good reason for Dhalsim players to stop hitting that, right? If you are likely to be in air range at all. So watch for when they do stop hitting it. But that was a perfectly set up EX Yoga Flame Yoga Fire because I don't think even the back jump or the neutral jump probably would. I don't think either one would have gotten DWuulfe out of that. I think I would have gone for Super 2. One thing you can often do is that once you've learned that spacing, if you think that the Dhalsim player has stopped, as in they're not going to throw another button because that spacing has been achieved, and therefore it's pointless to use the heavy punch, then with Necalli you can often immediately use the Crawling Beast. They might try to teleport, but that's more of a mix-up game at maximum range than anything else. And again, remembering that this move isn't so much a I'm going to hit you with this, it's a shield. It's a shield against certain Dhalsim long buttons, it's a shield against certain Dhalsim, like, aerial stuff. shield that is being slightly mistimed at the moment. But the real reason that's happening has more to do with the tendency of the player to relax into situations. Unfortunately, not enough health for that shield to have done its job that time. Because there are definitely trades involved here. Another good reason, as demonstrated there, is that holding straight down for the heavy punch in those scenarios guarantees you won't have a specific type of trouble, even if you're being crossed up. Because you're really too far out to need to block anyway, right? This is hard to get used to, but it does help out.
Dhalsim wins.
Well, it seems our previous Ryu left. So this is not in fact the Ryu that was playing before. This was previously our Kolin. Whether or not that will be the character they choose again, we'll see in a bit. Nope, they have moved on to Ryu. But taking the other path, using both the thrust spike parry and Ishin, which normally in this matchup leads to more so either whiffing or expecting more than is likely to happen. But it does allow you to throw a lot more fireballs safely. Whether or not those fireballs hit is a different question, but you can definitely throw them, which actually can be somewhat useful. Characters who have projectiles have the capacity to whiff punish from slightly further away and with slightly different intentions when Dhalsim is trying to zone them out with buttons in that form. But they're still watching for much of the same thing. Am I in the right space for this to work? One other good option is already being shown off here, the ability to decide whether or not to make an approach following your fireball and in which way to make that approach. Since Dhalsim is basically a wall of control of space in front of him, you can't just do as you like even though you have put them in a position where they must defend. If anything, you have to understand specifically that Dhalsim can't stay up there forever. And that is probably your best bet. You don't really want to start moving the moment he dodges the fireball. There's the whiff punish I'm talking about. What you usually want to do is take it to the air if possible, similar to what Lara does. But you get to throw the Hadouken first, and that's relatively helpful. Lara needs to get closer for her tactics to work, so she must set up an even more complex jump than Ryu needs to. Ryu can use the fireball to control Dhalsim's space for a little bit, and then understanding that he has to come back down. He can teleport, but you're already in motion most of the time by that point. Unfortunately, that used up all of their meter, so the optimal situation in which Dhalsim can't do certain pressure because of having to worry about the Ishin is not achieved. But you can still do the same thing as before. See? The jump. You are closer now, but note what happens directly then. Dhalsim is in a position that is actually disliked. You can't necessarily tell really easily, depends on the player, but they definitely dislike that position enough for you to get a little something out of it. I'm not sure if medium would have worked, because Ryu's Tatsus are a little weird. Still technically a good try. You see them here learning how long can you stay up there, what do you need to do to stay up there longer, and what should I do in order to deal with it. Unfortunately, it's a hard and long road to learn that, regardless of what you're doing. Sure, go for the damage. Honestly, I don't think the meter was doing that much else in the matchup anyway. Ah, still got it. Still, that was a really, really unfortunate drop. Our Dhalsim skill tends to, like, even if we got them low most of the time, I bet you they just have second V trigger, and it would still be just as dominating. Because this person has chosen what I consider to be one of the better ones for their style. To just be able to go, no, I'm over here, I'm relaxed, and now I'm just going to put a big fireball in front of you. It plays so well into the rest of their playstyle that I think I'd be very loath to advise changing it in pretty much any matchup. Of course, that is obviously the more popular one now. The Yoga Burner isn't the greatest and most chosen anymore, because the situations that it feeds into are not often situations Dhalsim wants to be in. I think only maybe like the birdie matchup would that be the... I can't even call it default. I would have to ask a Dhalsim whether or not they would bother to switch for birdie. I'd still attack suit too.
Dhalsim wins.
You'll be able to tell as a Lara whether or not things are going your way in this matchup by how much Dhalsim has to teleport away from you. If teleports are happening but not to try to kill you, you're probably doing well, and you should specifically consider that because you're doing well, you should more so slow down rather than speed up. Though he's by no means a helpless character, Lara does not have that much difficulty in execution required to protect her from Dhalsim. As you also see demonstrated there, I wasn't expecting to see it, so I didn't talk about it. You can, in fact, get to the point where your jump spacing will even dodge Yoga Fire. I might have mentioned it, but I don't think I made much of a point of it. And that was basically what I was talking about. OmniRabbit had control of the situation, and could have more or less waited for Pirkle to try to get out of the corner in whatever methodology. This one's hard because this one is actually, yeah, see, that one's the, I actually have to have perfect execution right now in order to get out of this. But Omni clinches it today. Believe it or not, I can get the bot to do that, but I can't get it to do it often enough. So maybe he's had some chances to practice this before. The range game is really working out right now. But being forced back here, yep, we get the jump. And the situation goes back. Similarly here, backdashing out of this situation is slightly better because Dhalsim is pushing to keep control of a situation. And if you don't have a plan that you think will beat your opponent's mindset, then back off. Just stand right there, you're fine. I think Omni's just using the EX because there's meter to spare. And honestly, that's probably a good plan. Yeah, that's probably better too. Because now, eventually, V-Reversal is going to be available. And there's the loop out. No V-Reversal. Then again, I don't know if that would have been a bait. Not quite. Our Dhalsim knows which side they're going to be on. And that's a large part of mastering this character. When other people are doing everything they can to outmaneuver you, knowing exactly where you are going to be, relatively speaking, is really important. It's kind of hard to be sure consistently, but important. That might have been an intentional drop / reset, because the spacing again was kind of off. I don't remember if this works. Yes, it does. And I'm not sure, did they rage quit? Was it? That seems a little weird. I don't know. I'm not going to accuse them of rage quitting in that situation, but the match is over one way or another, I guess. I think this one is done this way. Because Kolin starts up her glacier through command grab fairly slowly, it acts as a relatively good whiff punish for when you expect people are trying to keep you out in some other way. When you want to play footsies, you want to like step forward and hit your crouch medium kick, and your opponent is waiting for you to do that. This is not one of those matches. This is one of those matches where it's more likely that at that range the opponent is going to hit with a strike that will not only reach, but is also fast enough to deal with the spacing. Which means that the better option is to do this, even if it's going to slightly be a problem regardless. No, too slow. Why am I hitting that today? I've been playing some game lately where my counter is technically on R1. But I can't think of what it is. My quote-unquote aerial counter.
Round 2. Fight.
In order to defeat DWuulfe when playing Kolin, I must not telegraph any intentions. And that's back to what I was trying to practice today. I wouldn't say I'm having any execution trouble, and the main reason why it becomes difficult is because you can't really lock down Necalli as easily. He always has a way out, even if it's a risky way out. A relatively defensive player can keep that going for a really long time too. My best bet is to land my own throws, but there's no reason to let me do that, basically. Plus, it's kind of... cheap is the wrong word, but let's just say that against this particular opponent in this mindset and situation, I can throw a lot, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing. It becomes possible to throw so much simply because doing so causes the opponent to be on guard for the throws in a way that lets it be a lockdown. You'll notice a lot of things that will not happen if I start to throw a lot, because in order to stay in the mindset of getting out of all the throws, you have to do a lot less. But as I noted, my opponent is quite defensive, so sometimes you reach the point where there isn't a whole lot else to do other than sit there and not play the match, per se. This one has been so intense that I actually didn't realize we were so close to the end of stream. The lounge is probably going to stay open for a while longer. But, for now, you can continue to enjoy regular old Street Fighter.
You win.
When I say that you can't telegraph what you're going to do, it's not actually a matter of, like, assuming that your opponent can read your mind or something. It is simply that you must blank your mind and open it to all of your options in any given time frame and space, rather than trying to end up doing what you'd expect to do. For example, right there, my mind was in an offensive mode, I blanked it, and then therefore was not anymore and was able to bait the uppercut. Similarly there, learning to blank your mind at the right spaces in matchups is probably the most important skill you can have for higher level play, because your opponents will simply not do exactly what you expect them to do regardless. Similarly there, I could think to myself, I can waste this whole thing. I don't have to think about using this in a different way or using it later, because the match hasn't led to that yet. I did it too early, I think. This is particularly useful against more defensive opponents because they are spending so much less energy thinking about how to open you up that they're able to spend more energy thinking about what it is you have in your mind, what they can do to stop your current plan. This, on the other hand, is an execution test lockdown, so I can't really expect much from myself now. I still have trouble with that to this day, and my opponent knows it. So, I guess I couldn't really have expected much more at this point. Join us tomorrow for our Melty Tuesday, or rather Tuesday Melt, and on Wednesday for Wednesday night in Birth. On Thursday we should be having our King of Fighters, and on Saturday, Dead or Alive. Sunday is still in the air, possibly Absolver, and bringing us back around to another Monday Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge. You can find all of our bots on our website 2-mk.org under their various headings. And keep track of what we are doing when we release spots and whether or not we are streaming at 2_mk_FGC on Twitter. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.